Good morning. I'm Sarah Wheaton, Chief Policy Correspondent with Politico Europe, and we are joined virtually, coming to us live from Odessa in Ukraine, Vice President for Promoting a European Life at the European Commission, Margaritis Schinas. Good morning, Commission Vice President. How are you?
Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Thank you. Thanks for making this work. I love this background that you have here. So we're going to get into a good conversation about health policy in just a second, but where Politico and true to form, we have to ask you about a political thing in the news. So as the Commissioner for Vice President for Promoting the European Way of Life, you have a very broad portfolio. It includes migration. There's been a bit of a debate about European funding for border walls. President Ursula von der Leyen has said, no, EU funding cannot go towards any sort of physical barrier on the Belarus border. But yesterday, we reported that the head of the EPP group in Parliament, Manfred Weber, has said, actually, why not? So, Commissioner, what do you think?
Well, I think the Commission position is very clear. We are facing a new type of threat in our external border. This is a hybrid threat. It's not the first time that we saw it in the Lithuanian-Belarus border. Last year, we saw it in the Greek-Turkish border. A few months ago, we saw it in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta in northern Africa. So the obvious thing for the European Union to do is to make sure that those who seek to attack Europe by weaponizing human misery should know that we will defend the border and we will keep the border. And I think so far, in all these situations, we managed to do it. Now, the operational responsibility for organizing the management of our external border, of course, lies with the member states. It is not us from Brussels to do that. But at the same time, we do have resources that would allow us to help member states to organize these defenses, not, of course, by financing the cement and the stones and the physical obstacles and walls, as the president very well said, but we have the capacity to assist and finance member states with a broader ecosystem of border management at the European Union external border that pertains to technological solution, command centers, cameras, thermic cameras, vehicles, and so on and so forth. So this is how we'll do it. I think if there is one lesson that these situations have taught us is that migration is a common problem. It cannot be delegated to our member states, which because of geography are faced with the situation and the threat. This is a common responsibility.
Thank you. And that's actually a decent segue into this bigger question of the European Health Union. The mantra is, of course, that viruses do not respect borders either. And so we'll get into this health discussion that is our purpose today. We're speaking in the context of a fourth wave starting, and here in Belgium and much of Western Europe, we have pretty high vaccination rates, so things might get a bit worse, but so far it seems fairly okay. Whereas in Eastern Europe, especially in Romania and Bulgaria, where a third, a quarter of the population is vaccinated, they're really back in crisis mode. The goal of the European vaccine procurement strategy was to have this unified supply and approach to vaccination. So, what would be your message to member states now as they're observing the different terrain and making decisions about how to handle travel ahead of the holidays and that sort of thing? What message would you have to capitals?
Well, I guess the starting point in this discussion is that the European common response to the pandemic was a success story. We now have well over 75% of the general population vaccinated. You can imagine what would have happened without this high degree of vaccination across European geography. We have a mentality of cooperation. We have new decisions on therapeutics. We have the agencies are now fully focusing on what it takes for science to help us. But yes, you're right. We have a problem in 5 member states, the 3 Baltics, Bulgaria and Romania, where the level of vaccination is still very low. And this creates a problem that we need to address. We need to address it, of course, first at the local level with the help of national governments and regional authorities. We cannot do this from Brussels. Vaccines hesitancy is something that national and regional leaders should be in the lead of. We can help with the European Union by sharing best practices. I also, as you know, I was the spokesman of the Commission, of the Juncker Commission. The first real initiative against vaccine hesitancy was the Margaritis Juncker initiative in the previous commission. Who would have told us then that that would be an issue 5 years later? But I think that the overall success of the European Union in managing the pandemic should not create this sort of idea of complacency that things will work out themselves. No, we're not out of the woods yet. And yes, there is a lot to do, especially in these areas where vaccination rate is very low. So my message is vaccinate, vaccinate, and vaccinate.
Last year, you expressed real openness to the idea of potentially changing the treaties to give Brussels more authority over questions of health. We're in the middle of trilogue negotiations about expanded roles for the European Medicines Agency and the European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. We've heard from capitals about their reactions to HERA. How do these sort of developments and these political discussions influence your perspective on the potential for treaty change and the need for treaty change?
Look, under the leadership of President von der Leyen and together with my colleague Stella Kyriakides, we were at the heart of the EU response to the pandemic. And when I look back and I see what we managed to achieve, we're talking a bit of a small European miracle. Who would have told us a few years ago that the European Union would buy massively vaccines for the general population? I mean, who would have told us that we'll buy 4.4 billion doses of vaccines, that will have spent community money to do that will have a new European Health Union emerging with new reinforced mandates for the existing agencies and the new HERA structure to help us anticipate and plan. All this, Sarah, was possible, as the French friends would say, en traité constant, according to the existing treaties. We exhausted and exploited every inch of EU competence according to the EU treaties to do all that. So looking back as a practitioner, I would say the rather weak legal basis on health policy that we have in the European Union did not constrain us from bringing up so much change. But I'm very open to the argument that says that if this was a major test for the European Union health policy, probably we should, now that the firefighting stage is over and we're going into construction work as architects, that probably we could review or revisit the legal basis for health policy in the treaties. I'm open to this argument. Clearly, that would be a strong signal of the willingness of our member states to pull together even more resources for health policy. But being open to this argument does not mean that the existing legal basis did not help us to do the many good things that we were able to do for the last 18 months.
Mm. And do you have a sense of the pulse of of the member states? Is there any new openness to giving Brussels more authority, or is that still kind of a source of major resistance?
Look, I'm in constant contact with member states and health ministers, and not only health ministers. Due to my areas of competence, I'm in constant contact with ministers from 5 council formations. I think that when it comes to health policy, ministers and member states, and rightly so, they wouldn't like the European Union to duplicate things that are done well at the national level. There is no point for the European Union to compete with member states on healthcare or organizing hospital care. This is not our ambition either. This is not where the European Union can bring added value. I think that member states would be very open, as we are, in reinforcing the trans-border dimension of health policy in Europe by making sure that in times of crisis we can have better transfrontier cooperation, that we have the capacity to anticipate the pandemics before they hit us, that we're able to quickly organize common responses in terms of therapeutics, vaccines, PPE, or whatever is needed. So, yes, I sense a certain openness of member states to do more, but we have to be very careful on what we really want to do together in the future before jumping into an institutional debate on treaty change.
Well, one idea that came up at our summit yesterday was the Maltese health minister, Chris Fearn, said that he actually would like to see the Commission take over joint procurement of various types of therapeutics, not just vaccines in an emergency, but things like rare disease drugs. What do you think of that idea?
Yes, that's an interesting track of work to be considered. We have already done some work in the past on rare diseases, where indeed the nature of this problem requires a European response. We can also do much more when we are now starting to spell out and implement the EU beating cancer plan. I think this is also important because for the first time we'll bring together under one single EU platform the many things that we can do to fight cancer and the many resources and instruments that we have at our disposals, from research to healthy lifestyles to palliative care to survivorship. So there are so many things that were scattered around that we can now bring together. And if there is an appetite for member states to trust us on public procurement for these type of situations, I think we would be very happy to consider it. The vaccine's success and the public procurement also of the PPE, I think, was a successful test in us doing so.
Mm-hmm. Another idea that came up yesterday, I talked to Anthony Fauci, the longtime U.S. infectious disease advisor, whose profile has grown a lot worldwide throughout the pandemic. And I asked him what the U.S. did right that maybe Europe could learn from, especially when it came to the earlier vaccine rollout that the U.S. had. And he said basically the U.S. has been spending tons of money since decades before the pandemic on biomedical research, and of course under Operation Warp Speed, I think it was around 10 billion was spent, within just a few month period. Do you see Europe, being able to mount a similar sort of research investment going forward?
Well, Europe has the biggest research and innovation program in the world. Our Horizon program of almost 100 billion for the next 7 years. It's the most ambitious research instrument that we have at our disposal, and I'm very confident that we can use it also for preparedness and biomedical research. This is happening, as you know, to a certain extent already. And when it comes to organize preparedness and awareness and this sort of anticipatory defense, the new proposal for our ERA authority, I think it's very well in line with the US system. BORDA type arrangements, and we also have a financial commitment for HERA from various sources of around 50 billion, which is more or less comparable to the American Apollo initiative. So I don't think that we are lagging behind in ambition when it comes to the US. Yes, there was a problem on our vaccination strategy, especially in the first weeks and months compared to the United States. But I think that was also because we allowed this perception to develop in Europe that all Europeans would be vaccinated at the same time in the first few weeks of the vaccination program with the same jab, which was, I think, a mistake from our part. We should have explained that this was a marathon, not a sprint, that the European portfolio would not have just one provider, but 6, 7, and that the rate would pick up as the new jabs would come into the market. I think the end of the process vindicated us. But I concede that in the first part of the vaccination program in Europe, we had some hiccups that could have been avoided.
We have a question from Patrick Bertrand in the audience, and I apologize to Patrick because on my iPad here I can only kind of see half of his question, but I can intuit what he's trying to say, which is how can we say that the EU response is a success when only 14% of the doses worldwide have been delivered to low-income countries. And at this point, as my colleagues reported last week, I believe that the European Union has only delivered about a quarter of the doses that they have committed to COVAX in lower-income countries by the end of the year. So, what's the plan for speeding up those donations?
Look, first of all, yes, I agree that the good is always the enemy of the better, and I agree that the level of global vaccination is not at the level of ambition that we would have liked to see across the world. Having said that, I think it's unfair to sort of criticize the European Union for the lack of global vaccination. I think the European Union, on the contrary, is probably one of the protagonists, the key players in pushing for global vaccination. Team Europe within COVAX is the leaders in providing doses. The commitment we have is to reach 500 million doses by May 22 through COVAX. And it's not a secret that we have exported to the world almost as many vaccine doses as we consumed within the EU. So yes, I agree with the question that we could have done better, the world could have done better. Yes, I agree that 4% of vaccination in Africa is too low. But at the same time, you know that we, together with African Union, are now investing in production capacity in Africa, together with African partners and the companies to make a difference.
Can you commit that the European Union will deliver the doses that it promised by the end of the year by that deadline?
Look, the sharing of doses is a very complex operation. It's not. Does not have to do with the willingness of our member states to share, but it also has to do with the very complex logistics and the validity, lifetime of certain jobs. So we're working with member states now to help them to create templates for sharing the types of jabs that are to be shared. We have some member states that are developing these templates together with companies. The idea is not to launch ad hoc arrangements for each sharing a contract, but rather use these templates to go fast. And we hope that the rate of sharing and donation will pick up from now until the end of the year, because our member states now know what are the dysfunctionalities that they have to address to go faster.
Thanks. I'm going to ask you another question that's may seem a little out of left field, as we say, but it's related to your kind of diverse portfolio. So part of your job is also to combat anti-Semitism within the European Union. And during the COVID pandemic, we saw things like former French Health Minister Agnès Buzyn, who's Jewish, targeted specifically related to her religion, to her religious background and the virus. A lot of the conspiracy theories about the global elite are inherently anti-Semitic. So how has the pandemic sort of informed and complicated your other task of fighting anti-Semitism in the EU?
The answer is a lot. We have unfortunately seen figures of anti-Semitic content multiplying by 7 times in French-speaking online outlets and almost 13 times more in German-speaking outlets. The pandemic was conducive to all sorts of conspiracy theories and false truths, and I think anti-Semitism could not be an exception. But we're very much aware of what we need to do. As you know, on the 5th of October, we have presented the first ever EU strategy against anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life in Europe. We want our Jewish communities across the European Union to feel safe and protected. We want to preserve the memory of the Shoah now that the last survivors are leaving us with their horrible stories. We need to build on a new understanding of how Europe can become again a place where Jewish life can thrive. Holocaust was a stain in our history, one of the darkest chapters in our history book, and we are determined to work for a better future for our Jewish citizens across the European Union.
Thank you. And I think we're about out of time. I'm actually not sure how much time we have left, so if my colleagues who are putting signs in the back can bring them closer so that I can see them. But I'm going to go ahead and fit in at least one more question from our audience. Bara Uman asked, don't we need to invest more in prevention, education, strengthen the health workforce, and patient literacy and lifestyle in order to sort of prepare ourselves better for the next pandemic? And as Burr points out, investments in prevention are usually only about 3% of health budgets.
Yes, I'm happy to answer this question, but as this rather pretentious armchair indicates, Sarah, I'm about to have a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, so you would allow me this to be the last answer to the question. Yes, I agree that we need, in this post-pandemic world, to draw the lessons of the last 18 months. And I think that the 2 key notions now, the 2 key lessons that we're drawing from this is the quest for resilience and autonomy. Europe needs to come out of this much stronger, not only in terms of institutional defenses and architecture of this new EU health union, but also in terms of messages to the population, to the overall awareness of our lifestyles, of the way we live, the way we can organize our lives in society, healthy diets, physical exercise. I think that as always the case, after this major crisis, Europeans cannot afford of swinging back to pre-pandemic realities. We have to be much more conscious when we travel, when we live in society, and I'm very confident that this would happen. In a way, it is already happening, and I'm also confident that this will also help us to boost health budgets across the European Union in all our member states, and in the community budget, where for the first time we have a first self-standing program for health policy of an ambitious level of over 5 billion euros for the next 7 years.
All right. Well, thank you so much for letting us run over a little bit and for fitting us in Ukraine. Really interesting conversation about the politics of a united health effort in Europe and the way we spend our research money, as well as various complications that resulted from the pandemic. So, Mr. Commissioner, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all.
And so our next session is a networking break, so feel free to get up, stretch your legs, and then we'll be back in 15 minutes, 5 minutes. Okay, because I ran over. All right, so get your orange juice and coffee quickly and head back in for our panel discussion of Are European Health Data Too Precious to be Shared?